There you go. With this one, I wanted to be a little adventurous, and I wanted to have tropical birds on it. And then someone told me they don't have those in the summer hours. Well, I don't care. They're my birds, I wanted those birds on it, I got those birds on it. Actually, the birds that were supposed to be on there that do fit, they look like pigeons that are dressed up for Pride Month. They look really so these are better. This next diorama is Death of the Tiger. I actually brought it here last year. It was, having said I wasn't going to do another big diorama, I did a big diorama. But with this one, it's set during the siege of Budapest. And again, someone told me, well, they don't have any Tiger ones in Budapest. So like, how can we be sure? Absolutely 100% sure. Other than that, I only have a Tiger one in my stash, so that's why I don't have a Tiger one. Now this next one, talking about story layers. I try and do with my weathering, in layers, as the boys were saying in the last seminar. But I try and do my story in layers as well. And by weathering in layers, you can tell a story. So for example, you can have panels on this Viper that look fresh. So there's been a repair, from a previous battle. By the same token, you can have really badly flame marked panels that show that it has been in combat. Tells a story. You can't see all of it, but there's in the corner there's Apollo standing next to the crew chief who's Now the overarching storyline should always be the most obvious thing. And in this one, you can see there's a Tiger tank, as we say in England, he's about to come a cropper. There's a Russian with a Panzerfaust that's about to spoil his day. That is the obvious story, but what else is going on? So here you can see there's a Horch vehicle, it's been shot up, it's riddled with bullets, as are the occupants. And you can see this Tiger tank is approaching and these men are being urged to examine it. Now you can see from the vehicle, it's full of stuff that's been looted. So obviously these SS boys were up to no good, which is handy for them. Okay. More facets to the story. You can see there's some scouts and some other Russian troops that are coming up from the dock area. And this is another separate little story here, that a Russian has obviously taken this German guy out with his knife. But he's in a tanker's uniform. There was no tank in the diorama, no Russian tank. So obviously his tank's been knocked out. He's now on foot and he's looking for revenge, which he seems to have found. Okay. Now, inside the building, there's a lot more going on. And if you just look at the diorama from the outside, you have that, as we said, that overarching story. The tank is there, it's about to be taken out by the guy with the Panzerfaust. But there's other stuff going on. And in the back of the house, there's something going on in every room. See, there's something happening everywhere. So lots of little stories. They don't take away from the main thing, but there's other stuff going on. Now on the top floor, you can see this German officer is being interrogated. We're going through his address book, it looks like. And his colleague there is not being so helpful, and he's being gagged and put down. Make a mental note of what these two boys look like. That's all I'm saying. Now on the ground floor, that's the first floor for you colonials. The Germans are just approaching the building, and they're about to make an entry. But unknown to them, on the inside, there's a little welcoming committee. There you go. Waiting for them to come in. Okay. Now, and around the corner, there's another batch of Russian scouts. And you can see they are two waiting for a surprise. Now, they came from the same direction as the horde, so it kind of suggests that they were the ones that shot it up. Now, then there's the small details, the little things. A poster, someone's sweetheart in the tank, putting in a more elaborate dashboard in the vehicle. On the far right there, the posters are Hungarian, red, white and green, so it gives you an idea of the location where it's going. Now, inside the building, you've got a trashed office, you have a map, you can see the telephone. Over here, there's a burst water pipe, and pigeons, more birds. Okay? And I did actually play pigeon droppings. Accuracy. Here, this was my first attempt at scratch building this crane. It's the same as the mini art one, but I couldn't find anyone that had one in stock. Some of you know that I'm a flight attendant, and these may or may not be Delta statistics. Now, take for example this M54 truck in Vietnam. Again, small details, tell you a bit of a story. You can see on the right there, there's copies of Playboy and various other bits and pieces. And the guys are obviously looking tired, some of them are asleep, they've been in combat, so you can tell they're coming from somewhere, and they've obviously been through the mill. And there's a bit of solidarity between one of the soldiers on the ground who are driving past, and again you can see more details, some instruments on the dashboard there. And there's also, you can't quite see it, but there's a map on the seat as well. Now for the more observant viewer, again try and reward them, at the back of the diorama there are some Viet Cong who are studying a map, trying to get to the nearest McDonald's or whatever. But there's more details to see. This next one is called Broken Down. Again, different layers of story. The main story obviously is this M113 has broken down and they're fixing it before they can move on. You've got a young soldier here who's moved away from the others so he can read his letter from home. I think I did his hair a little too bright there. They're probably put him there because he was attracting snipers. And then on the far side, you've got these guys who have decided it's time to eat, and they've got some music going. And then body language can tell you a lot too. On the right there, you've got an officer, a typical officer, he's telling the enlisted man how to do something that he probably doesn't know how to do. On the left, you've got two Vietnamese women who are riding by down the river, just noticing there's just more invaders that are in the country. And then, when we look at body language, we can see the sergeant is telling these guys to help get it fixed, and from their body language they're saying, yeah, no, we're just having a coke and a smile, we're not doing that. And then on the far right, a couple of the guys are chatting, and then this guy definitely has the 1,000-yard sleigh guide. This one's called Kaput, the next one. This is SDKFZ 251, that's out there on the table. Again, this in theory is a vignette. It's a vehicle and 5 figures. It doesn't have to tell a story, but it does. This one you can see that there's a toolbox there, the engine compartment is open. I was going to say the hood, you said, no, hood's right, isn't it? I say bonnet, but hood. And there's a big oil sitting underneath, so the vehicle's obviously in some distress. This is why it's called Kaput. Now, other stories. These two guys have clearly had enough of World War II, they're done, and they are drinking. And on the far right, the NCO from his body language, he's obviously had enough of these guys, and is leaving the officer to get them moving. Now, over by the fountain, and we'll talk about dead space in a minute, just to fill in that area, we have a young soldier who, again, through his body language, he's tired, he's probably disillusioned. He was sold a bill of goods about this army conquering everybody, and things are not going well. There's also little stories, more pigeons, and a cat this time. on the far side. The pigeon's having a drink of water, but the cat's hungry. So, a couple more stories there. Now, if you know your vehicles, you'll know that SDKF said 250/20 Yuhu is late war. So to give an idea of a feeling of desperation towards the end of the war, the fact that this area has not had any damage just tells you the war has finally reached even here, and it's definitely towards the end. There's an abandoned handcart with a broken wheel, and if you look closely, there is a crate with some bottles in it, and that's probably where they got their booze from. You need to be also flexible with your ideas. This was going to be just a mutt Jeep with 2 MPs, and I finished painting them, painted everything, went to put the guy behind the steering wheel. He didn't fit. Not without me breaking both his legs. So I turned him sideways, and the hand that would have been on the steering wheel, I stuck a bottle in and made some water so he looked like he was cleaning his boot. And I thought, well, why would he be cleaning his boot? Ox poop. I'm an expert in poop now. So we have a Korean dressed farmer with his ox, and he's left little deposits on the road. This is environmental features and accuracy. It's important to make sure that your vehicle or your subject, your aircraft, whatever it is, matches the environment. It has to fit. For example, Winterketten tracks on German tanks, they look really cool. But if it's the desert, it's probably not much fun. So make sure that works. To do that, you can use, Google's really helpful for research and for finding photos that depict what you want to show. Now, I wanted to do a crashed aircraft in the jungle, but before I cut up a decent, expensive kit, I wanted to have a little practice at it. And to do that, I found a cheap Zero. It was actually at the Vegetation. That's it on the left. $10, $15, I think. And then I found this photograph on the right, and that helped me get the two closer together. Once I was happy with that, I was able to spend a bit more money and get my P38. I mean, if you're going to cut up a kit, it can be a little frightening. You just know what you're doing. Now, for research, I found out that aluminium doesn't rust. Aluminum, sorry, I can't do that. Aluminium doesn't rust. And the one on the right is actually off the coast of Wales. That P38 is made of harlequin, it's called. So by studying pictures of that, I could see that there are more whites and greys than browns when it comes to showing corrosion from aluminium. One bit of advice I'd give you, if you are going to start doing diorama, start simple. Don't do what I did. Start simple. So start with a desert scene or grassy field, and then build from there. This one on the left, this M50 Super Sherman, which is a South Evans Army vehicle. I wanted to just put a simple building behind it, and I found one online from a Dutch company, but it was going to take ages and cost a fortune. So that one is an exact copy in XPS Photo. Just cut that one. Now, dealing with vegetation, you want to make sure that your vegetation actually matches where you're going to put it. So, for example, this is obviously Vietnam. Those of you who know the film Platoon, this is Platoon. For this one, I had to make sure the vegetation not only matched, but was in scale. It's very easy to get stuff that's too big. And most of that was commercially bought, but the vines on the right are nothing but twine sprayed with sticky spray and then dropped into cut up leaves. So just make sure that what you're depicting is correct. There's no point thinking, I make beautiful pine trees, let me just put one in there. It wouldn't quite work. Again, making sure things match. You've got some leeway historically when it comes to things like uniforms, making sure your figures match the environment. Take, for example, the beginning of the German invasion of Russia. Once they got towards the winter, the Germans didn't have winter clothes. So there are still figures that you can use that have more summer clothing in some of these dioramas. And I'm doing a Battle of the Bulge one later in the year, and most of the figures that I've got have got those famous German Kharkov parkas, and you always associate those with the Eastern Front. But I wondered if I could possibly use them. So I wrote to a Facebook group that was people who are experts in the Battle of the Bulge, and asked them. And lo and behold, someone sent me photos that showed German units at Bastogne in the Kharkov parkas. So if you dig, you can find out. Now, modelling water could be a seminar all on its own. I keep things simple. I use a 1-to-1 ratio 2-part resin. I got it from Michaels. An adhesive and a hardener. It's very important that you get them right in terms of proportions. If you do not, they will never set. Ask me how I know. Now, there are ways to fix it. Option 1, I discovered, is you can make a hardener mix heavy combination of the two and put a layer of that at the top. That's one way. Did that here. The other way, if your diorama is featuring water that is not still, you can take Mod Podge, thick dollops of it, put it on, and then you blow it with a straw, and it goes into quite natural patterns. That's what it is like. And then it sets clear. It's a little nerve-wracking when it's all right. Now, clearly, pun intended, with water, there is a definite learning curve, and the hardest thing is making sure the stuff stays where you put it. With this diorama, I try to use plastic sheeting. I've now discovered that actually duct tape is one of the best things to use. And it leaked twice over our garden table. It didn't make me popular. But duct tape works really well as long as you don't have a huge amount of depth. Now, if you do have depth, it can bulge out, and then you have to hacksaw it off. That's what I know. This is Sherman on Flamenco Beach. Some of you have probably seen this photo in Puerto Rico. This tank gets repainted every few weeks, so it looks completely different when you Google it from one month to the next. It's quite cool. So, and I should have said to you that with this is side water from Mike from Mojo. When you do use resin, if you just leave it alone, it will form bubbles. Bubbles will float to the surface, and they will be there forever unless you do something about it. Now, what I usually do, I've got a little bottle of IPA, a little spray bottle. If you puff that over it, the bubbles pop like magic. It's amazing. The other option is, and you'll see this on YouTube a lot, is taking like an oven lighter and holding that over it, and they pop. But you have to try not to set things alight. Ask me how I know. Now, one more word on historical accuracy. A genre I discovered only in the last year was the German 1946 kind of thing, whatever we call it. And I found it gave me a lot of freedom because I could make World War II style vehicles and paint them any way I wanted. No one's going to argue with you. So I thought. So I did have one guy who saw one that I had done where it was mostly red primer, and he was like, "You guys in your red primer, and he put the eye roll emoji and said, the Germans would have used all their grey paint first, they would never have used red. It doesn't exist, but as long as you have me. Now this is another one that I built. This is actually the one I was talking about. And in terms of setting a scene, again, it's a little vignette. There's just two figures, one vehicle, but trying to put a little bit of a story in there. It's supposed to be the end of the end, so they've now taken to having another drink, like the Germans. And just for a bit of interest around the back of the tank, I put a cat. There's a cat decal there, so I had a cat pointing at it. Now something that you'll see a lot is dead space, which you want to try and avoid. When you put a diorama together or a vignette, one of the golden rules is to try not to have things all lined up straight, have them at an angle. One downside of that is it's going to leave you a gap up as it corners. What you need to do, ideally, is to have just something in there just to fill the space without detracting from the main scene, where we want to keep our overriding story going. So you can do that by putting in barrels, oil canisters, boxes, crates, small people. It's whatever you need. You can put stuff in there. And there are lots of places you can get them from. Tamiya do loads of barrels. Value Gear do boxes and stuff. Just something that's appropriate to the scene, because if it's not appropriate, then you are detracting people from it. That's a good thing for you to use. This next one is talking about compression. Sometimes when you do a diorama, you have to suspend reality. This is Vasily Zaitsev, everyone knows him, the sniper. If I had made this realistic distances, this diorama would have been from here to the wall. Obviously I cannot bring that in here. So you have to compress it. The diorama, I bought it last year actually, you could probably hit it with the rifle if you threw it from there, but you have to compress it. And it's just something you have to deal with. If you're going to have opposing sides on one diorama, that's something you're going to have to do. Now, in terms of materials that I use, most of the time my bases are XPS foam, just stuff that you get from Home Depot or those places. And it's nice and easy to cut. Use a sharp knife. When you do cut it, if you want clean edges, put it at the blade at a real angle and do repeated cuts. Don't try and cut it through at once, because it will shred and you're left with a really rough edge. So just repeated strokes of the knife. And then I use plaster of Paris usually for the base, and the foam you can use for rocks. Now, I discovered with my very first diorama that foam and spray paint don't always go together well. And I did melt a few bits and pieces. Now, contrary to popular belief, it's not the paint that does the damage, it's the propellant. So if you stay far enough away and missed it, you're usually okay. When I was doing this one, I got a little close, and the rock started to melt slightly. And I looked at it and thought, that's actually quite cool. So I used an oil wash on it, and then dry brushed it, and it looks more like a rock than it was going to. So now, I sometimes do it on purpose. And you can do that to change the surface of that foam. Otherwise it just looks like foam has been painted. There's a couple of examples here. The first one is, in the middle is a T62, that's the vintage Tamiya kit. And you can see the rocks behind it. I've given them some structure. And then I did this this little scene with the man from Evil Dead. And this was spraying it very close. You can see the effect that you can get. And then once you've used an oil wash and then dry brushed it, add some more green oil paint, and it doesn't look like foam. Now, something else to consider is the height of your diorama. Now, with this one, this was the second diorama I ever built. This was Fury. I just watched the film, I needed to make a tank. And I wanted to have pictures around the base because not everybody knows the movie. So they're actually on 4 sides. Some of you came last year, if you remember the Plastic Posse group for the show, I was there. But you've got a diorama that can be looked at from 4 different sides with information from 4 sides. This next one is called This Don't Work, and this is where, just through scrolling on the internet, I found this picture from Battle of the Bars, and I thought, I need to build that. So I built it so that the picture could be right underneath the tank, so you've got the same viewpoint, and with some information about it. Now, thinking back to that picture, in real life, where the tank was to where the building was, is a huge long space. So going back to what we were saying about compression, I couldn't build a diorama like that. There would have been a massive space with nothing in it. So I changed my scene. I made my scene how the area might have looked with the guys who actually did the graffiti just before they left. So you've got your traditional bucket that's got paint coming out of it, so that's the paint whiz. 2 soldiers here interacting, the one on top's probably just looked in. You see these fried Germans and his friend. On the far side, you've got a soldier who's reloading the Greyhound armoured car with more 50 caliber ammunition. On the far right of the diorama, you've got 2 guys from the Greyhound looking at this German tank that's knocked out, and the commander of the half-track. So that effectively fills in that right front side. And then, further back into it, you've got half-track, M3, with a guy who's still keeping an eye out. And because of the spent cartridges in the back, it seems like they've been fighting not very long ago. So again, that's another little layer of story. And then behind that, on the left-hand side, you'll see we've got a movie cameraman who's interviewing a soldier. And he is telling his family at home how he's winning the war single-handedly. And then on the right, we have 2 soldiers who are standing over what looks to be the remains of the tank crew. The one on the right is standing there looking quite victorious and full of himself, and the other one on the left, because of the tilt of his head, and he's looking there as if he's saying, "Oh, no, that wasn't me." And again, with good quality figures, they can tell you a lot. These are Alpine miniatures ones that are really easy to paint, well worth the extra money. Yes?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Go on then.
As a big fan of yours, this is awesome, but like you're very talented as a storyteller. And just kind of wondering if you could walk us through, like, before you start the scene, do you have it all in your mind, or do you have a general idea and let it kind of, and tell us how that creative process evolves, how that story becomes reality.
So it varies from build to build, and it kind of depends on what has inspired me in the first place, whether it is photograph, as in this situation, or it might be a vehicle that I might have seen out here today and think, I'd really love to incorporate that into something. Once I have that first idea of what the main focus of the diorama is going to be, that's when I start to think, how can I make this work? What can I add? And strangely, I have my best ideas in the shower. That's what I always think to happen. And I will have a thought of how I can make it work. It may be just through scrolling through the internet, I've seen lots of different figures, and I start to think which figures I can pull into it to make it work. And then I start trying to see if there's any kind of reference pictures that can help me and give me an idea of how to do things. But I don't have any set formula of how I come across it. They just kind of swirl around in here with all the space.
And then one other question, you have generated a lot of diagrams in a short amount of time. You're very, very prolific, and that's awesome. how do you, especially as somebody who models out of hotels, how do you overcome obstacles if you're building a diorama and you can't get a material you need or it isn't working out? Martin, how do you keep these things rolling as a flight attendant on the road?
Okay, I've got a little section that was going to deal with that in a minute, and I'll tell you how I do that.
Okay.
That's my organisation section. Now, those of you that are more keen-eyed and know more about dioramas, I broke one of the cardinal rules of the diorama building when I did this. Anyone got any ideas? Parallel. That's right. Thank you. Good. It's parallel. But I wanted it to match the photo. And I couldn't think of any way to have this tank at an angle and it matched the photo because the photo was straight on. Works for me.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what your answer was.
So my answer is that I wanted it to match the photo.
Right.
And I wanted the viewer to look at the photo, raise their eye line, and see the same thing.
Right.
If I had put the tank at an angle, that wouldn't have worked.
Okay.
It wouldn't look different. Okay, vegetation, just going back to vegetation a little bit, through saving money, I discovered, I mentioned Michael's before, I should get sponsorship from that really. They do little bags of greenery, and they're $6, $7, $8. I walked across the store to the other side of the same store, to the section that deals with hanging baskets. The same stuff is in bags 5 times the size with the same price. So, don't always feel you have to get, I shouldn't say this if there's any retailers in the room, but don't always feel you have to get that stuff, the right stuff. There's other things to use. Now, I mentioned rattle cans. They are a good way of using paint and not spending colossal amounts of money and taking time to clean out your airbrush and so on. When it comes to ground material, you can spray any colour you like, and I do tend to use maybe 2, 3, 4 colours, and I won't even wait for them to dry. I'll spray one, I'll get the can, I'll spray another, and they kind of blend, and it works. But if you look at the surfaces that they're on, most of this is coffee grounds. And you don't have to collect your, I used to collect coffee grounds from my wife's coffee every morning, but I discovered that she got for me at a local supermarket, they give away bags of used coffee grounds for people to use for their gardens. It's free. The price is right. And again, by looking around, you can find so many cheap alternatives. This was a challenge that I set myself. In the early days of COVID, I had to go to hospital or something, and I had to have a COVID test and then isolate at home for 5 days. So I thought, I'm going to challenge myself and try and do a diorama just of stuff around the house. Not the best one I've done, but it was fun to do. When he's having his acid bath, this is the lid of a spray can. In the middle there are tops from washing liquid, good canisters. These 2 things are Red Bull cans. The pipes are from Home Depot, they're like 57 pipe joints. That is a bubblegum container that my daughter gave me. And if you look across the top, those canisters with the mysterious fluid in, that's actually plastic container for nail polish. Just turned it over and painted it. So most of this is stuff around the house. So if you're into sci-fi and stuff, you'll find rubies and stuff everywhere. Can't quite see it on the left there. There's a mechanism for a door lock, or change the lock. I thought it would look cool, so I stuck that one as well. So there's so much stuff out there that you can use. Now, presentation of your dioramas is important, and there are lots of ways to do it. You can just paint the base area black. You can get frames from Walmart, for example, stick stuff on there. You can paint them any colour you like. You can have like a wood finish on them. For this one, This is LSSC rescue scene for Navy SEALs in Vietnam. The actual plaque is black already, and if I painted it black, you'd have lost it, you'd be able to see it. Because it was a jungle scene, got my trusty rattle cans out and just gave it a few little puffs of different colours of green. And again, talked about dead space. It's actually a pigeon that's masquerading as a seagull. Now, I did a platoon diorama earlier in the year. It's actually out there on the table. And I know that not everybody knows the movie. So when I wanted to do this base, I wanted to have pictures down the side so that people could actually look at the photos of the actors and look across and identify them. But having that big section in front also gave me a good platform for putting quotes on, because it's such a quotable movie. It's actually my favourite Vietnam movie. Everybody recognise this guy, right? It's alright. Yeah. So here, this is SDKZ 223, I think. Again, using the base and telling the story. The fact he's got a map, there's a sign on the other side of it that says Odessa, you've got refugees, you have a story now, instead of just sticking a vehicle on a base. There's actually a story, there's some emotion. This is actually set in Ukraine. It's an older diorama of mine. I want to say older, it's like a year and a half old. Recognize these two guys? from Hungary. I'm going to pretty crap all the two of them captured again. On one side, when you look at the diorama, you get the scene of vehicles going one way, refugees going another way. But if you go around the back of the diorama, you'll see inside the farmhouse, you'll have a Russian scouting team who are gathering information. And on the right, you can see there's a farmer and down here his wife, who are bringing out food and drink for the Germans to try and avoid them going into the farmhouse to do research. So there's the story. Okay, finally, organisation. This is what Scott was asking about. I'm a flight attendant. I spend 20 days a month flying, and I figured that is just a lot more than time that I'm missing. So I started taking stuff with me. I'm the only flight attendant whose lunchbox doesn't have any food in it. It's all paint and tools. So what I do with my phone is I make very, very precise notes of exactly the stages of my build. And what I will do is, before I go away on the trip, I will see what logically I could get done, and I will take only those things with me. I take a hard plastic sandwich box, so anything that I've built, I put in that box to protect it, so it doesn't get damaged. And when I'm at home, I use the same list. So, for example, if I've got to go all the way up to the top of the house to get a few bits and pieces, I check my list. Probably got 5 minutes, I could do a quick squirt of this, stick something on here. So it's always moving forward. Oh, and we're talking about saving money on this tank here, this Fury. The leaves are oregano, or oregano, sorry. Smells nice. Yeah, pretty much every build I have done in the last 18 months has had at least half of it done on the road. Here as well as making my Viper. Again, just taking all the bits that I needed. And this was a situation where I became aware that certain kits lend themselves to traveling on the road. This one was a really good one to do because you could definitely identify sub-assemblies. So I could work on separate bits and then bring it home and all put it together. Figures are great to do on the road. Tanks, tough little things. So you can, tank construction is a good one to do when you're traveling. And what I tend to do is I will do some work while I'm traveling, bring it home, do the airbrushing, next trip I'll do the weathering, and that way keep it moving and get a lot done. I've got one tank out there that I wasn't even going to enter in the competition, and I just started working on it over the last couple of trips, and it came together so quickly it was like, oh, it's done, might as well take it. But it's a great way to keep the hobby alive for me. So, I'd like to thank Jeff from Scale Colours and Steve from Value Gear for their support and help. And I would just say that as modelers, we only really have each other. So let's be nice to each other. Okay? Don't judge people's models by what they do, what they say, how they sound, how they look. None of that is important. Just build. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Yes, sir.
Do you sketch out the layout of your dioramas?
Sometimes I do. Once I've had the idea, I try and sketch it out so that I can see roughly how much space it's going to take. So I know how big it's going to be, I know how much dead space there's going to be, I know what I need to film. Yes, sir.
For the models that you said that you can compress, could you use smaller scale?
I should use smaller scale to take less room. So you could do 1/72, you could do 1/48.
So then it could be if you're sniping looking down, and then the person is smaller, because they're farther away.
So I see what you're saying. So that's what they call perspective. So, and I've seen people do it with aircraft, bombing ships and stuff. So yeah, I've seen ones where people have had 3 different scales, and that can really work. As long as you look at it from the angle they wanted to look at it from. If you look at it from somewhere else, it looks a bit odd. Thank you. Yes?
For your figures, are those all stock figures, or are you modifying?
Most of them are stock. Sometimes I will change equipment on them. I'll change arm position, and a lot of the time I'll change heads because some of the figures, the heads aren't great. And there's companies like Hornet that do much more detailed, and I'll swap them around for that.
What do you do with all these?
Did my wife make you ask that? Because our house is filling up, and I'm actually leaving one diorama here. And if no one takes it, I'm just leaving it. But I have to start getting rid of them. Yes.
You might build the tanks first and then just figure.
So I don't always do it the same way. Most of the time I build the vehicle first, then I've got an idea of how much space I need. But sometimes and this is what happens with me, when it comes to building the base, I usually do the base in one hit. And literally, I'll do it in 2-3 hours. I'll do the base. I just get the idea of my head and I have to do it. So a lot of the time I will do the base first, but most of the time it's the vehicle.
I had a professor long ago back in our school. He made murals, and the way he did it was he took spray paint, I think it was cryolite, and that paint insulation you get at Home Depot, he sprayed on it, and as the paint hit it, it would just eat right into it.
Yeah, that's what I was doing with the rocks. Yeah. Last one.
Do you reuse a lot of your figures and stuff from one diorama to another?
You mean using the same, actually literally the same ones or the same figures? The only diorama so far that I've dissembled was that very first one. Because it offends me. But it's not good. And I've still got those figures sitting there. And the problem is, I found though for me, is that my level is changing. And the older stuff I look at and I'm like, I don't want to put that on something yet. So I've got a couple that for some reason came out great, and I'll use those again, but generally no. Thank you.
Thank you.
Spray on the phone.
Soluble dinosaur.
Yeah, so it's
Needs to be big dinosaurs, big resin. BRDs.
yeah. It's almost the bubbles come up.
Black spots. The scaling, you know, green highlights, like in the scale. Because I saw it on the internet. I saw it on the internet. I was wondering what it does. And then I saw it sitting there on the table. Hang on. I took a piece of paper and I slid it close to my eyeball, you know. There was all that subtle shading there, and you got the heavily texture on the skin. If nothing else, maybe do hey, how you been?
Yeah.
We're doing robots. We're doing angry.
I saw the diagram and I didn't recognize it.
We're all here, so it's definitely for you.
It's for you guys. Yeah, well, you guys are one.